Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the 141st session of the online Optom Learning Series. And for today's session, we have with us Dr. Vidyut Rajan. She is an optometrist as well as an educator based in Pune, India. She has completed her graduation, her double master's degree, whereas she did an MBA in HR from Pune, and she also did a master's in optometry as well. And recently, she's also been awarded with a doctorate in optometry from the Manipal Academy of Higher Education in Manipal, India. And over the last few years, she has also completed or successfully hosted 35 certificate courses, which were online or offline in terms of educational series, demonstrating lifelong learning abilities. In terms of experience, she has a practice experience of over 15 years, where she has a specialty practice experience in low vision, dispensing, and sports vision. And she is also very closely associated with academia, with over 16 years of experience as a lecturer. Not only that, but she has also been privileged to be head of certain institutions and also University Board of Studies member as well. She was also a research member, a team member in terms of Oculus projects. This was to harmonize the optometry curriculum across Europe, Israel, and India. She has numerous publications onto her credit, and her special research interests are in optometric education, medical education, visual and dispensing optics projects. And today, Dr. Rajan is going to talk to us about how do we incorporate skills for lifelong learning, and how do we go about that. So welcome, Dr. Rajan, onto our platform. And let me just leave the screen time to you.
Thank you, Fakhruddin. Pleasure to interact with you all on this platform. Welcome all, because this is my first session on OLS. So I hope it will be of useful. And let me first declare that it's not going to be a clinical or optometry as such, but it's going to be on a very general learning skills, which is lifelong learning skills. So I'll be loudly speaking on skills for life learning, but don't make such faces. Your face should be as the same face as in focus there, that is the smiley. Generally, when we say learning, generally all students, or when we were students, we would make such kind of faces. Either we are depressed or sad or angry, never happy about it. But truly speaking, any learning which is completed on or during the professional life, where you are on the duty, it's always a pleasure, because you gain some knowledge, you gain some skill, you gain additional competence, which is indirectly and directly helping your patients, your customers, and your students if you are an academician. So it's all about learning throughout, lifelong. So moving forward, let me just give you a slight thinking about what is the present situation. You know that we all are passing through pandemic, and it's not going to end so soon. I mean, last year when we started, at that time we were hoping that in another one month or 2 months or 3 months it will stop, and then the life will come back to normal. But now it has been more than, say, 1.5 years, and it's still continuing, and there is absolutely no sign that it is going. So what are the changes that you have done in your behavior? Isn't it this one? You have started washing hands frequently, you have started using mask, sanitizer, and you have also started keeping social distances. So all this is nothing but very small change in your behavior, which the pandemic has forced us to adapt. Now, have we learned all these things newly? Truly speaking, no. We already know how to wash hands. We already knew that the masks are put up, especially in hospital areas and where infections are very likely. We already have this from our childhood, that you should maintain a distance of at least 1 arm when you are standing in a crowd or in a group. So it's not really new, but we have done this small change in our behavior, and the pandemic is actually a driving force behind it. And then we have landed ourselves into a new normal. So what is that new normal? Nowadays, if you see, for example, even on a TV show, if you see a crowd, you automatically have a wondering kind of a face and you say, okay, this much crowd, how come it is possible? So we all have kind of accepted that moving into the crowd or enjoying the functions with the crowd is almost like it's not going to exist. So this change has created opportunities, like say for example, initially you were to go in cinema theaters and watch movies along with say 200 people more, but now what you do, you simply push onto OTT platforms, and you along with maybe maximum your family, you enjoy your cinema, you enjoy your movie. So this has created new normal, this creates new opportunities, but at the same time, as a professional, it also imposes some demands. If I have to brief you, coming to optometry profession, what are these new demands imposed? So we have few equipments which are modified, few came with the shields, we started using hand gloves, we started using face mask and whatnot. And we also have now entirely new discipline coming up, which is called as teleoptometry or teleophthalmology. So sitting behind the screen, you can consult with the patients. And this is something which is really a changing pattern in your practice or in your learning. So basically, if I would summarize this in one quote, it will be learning is all about the change, and the change basically drives the learning. Whatever we have learned during this pandemic, that we will adapt as new normal. That's where we come to a concept of lifelong learning. So basically, when lifelong learning concept came in, UNESCO basically defined it as a concept for adult learning. So we all know that we all, as a child, we all went to school. We were privileged to get admission into the school, but not many people have that. So those people who did not had any chance to go to school, in adulthood they tried to get literacy, and that is where this concept was introduced way back in 19th century. But present scope, if you talk about this term lifelong learning, even UNESCO says that any development which is done after the formal education is over, that will be termed as lifelong learning. So basically, it's nothing but the continuing development of knowledge and skills that people experience after formal education and throughout their lives. So once you have completed, let's say your graduation, your degree, whatever you are learning in your profession, then after, if you try to develop your knowledge, your skill, or enhance your competence, that will be termed as lifelong learning. So in a way, even this session comes under lifelong learning. Whatever online series or whatever online lectures, webinars you are following, that will come under lifelong learning. So basically, the lifelong learning builds upon the prior learning, and what it does, it just expands your knowledge and skills in terms of its depth and its breadth. It's not that you are learning some new concept here, but whatever concept you have already gained, you would expand that. You would go beyond what the primary concept was. So you will attain more depth and more breadth of the same concept, and that will lead to a success. So you have learning, you follow it up with your online training or skills training, then you have some instructions from your organization possibly, and then you complete the practice or you implement the things into the practice, which will lead to a success. Coming to what is learning, I mean, when I was thinking about this lifelong learning, I immediately had a thought, do you basically know what is learning? So basically, if you call or if you take a theoretical definition, the learning is the way in which the individuals or the groups acquire, interpret, reorganize, change, or assimilate a related cluster of information, skills, and feelings. Very boring definition, right? Even I don't remember it. So, but if you have to remember learning, in say three simple words, then they are knowledge, skills, and attitude, which in turn composes your competence. So if you have to increase your competence in your profession, you just need to acquire some knowledge, you need to acquire some skills, and you need to adapt some good attitude, professional attitude, you will become more competent than the yesterday. So this is about learning. Coming back to lifelong learning, all the learning activity that is undertaken throughout life with the aim of improving knowledge, skills, and competencies within a personal, civic, social, or employment related perspective is called as lifelong learning. This was the definition given by European Commission in 2001. So what are we trying to do? We are going back to school? Actually, no. But we are going back to the concepts which were learnt in school, and we are continuing our learning from that area to the most advanced area now. Basically, this lifelong learning is a pattern of formal and informal activities. Not necessary that you would actually go back, sit on the benches of the school or college, and then try to learn something from a teacher. Not necessary. You can attend, there are various ways. We'll talk about it in a minute, but there are various ways, and any attempt which is made towards gaining some new knowledge or enhancing some skill and gaining a good attitude, professional attitude, will be termed as lifelong learning. And of course, this is needless to say that it will have a direct benefit in your career development. Coming to the types of lifelong learning, there is what is called as formal lifelong learning. So basically, you go and enroll yourself into college courses. Just like, for example, after completing bachelor degree, you go for master's degree. Once you complete master's degree, some of you may go to PhD. So this is nothing but formal lifelong learning, where a person goes and enrolls themselves into a formal educational institute, attaining some degree or some certificate. Second one is self-directed learning, where the students would actually decide what they want to learn and how they want to learn. So they will take the path control of the path and also the pace of the learning. So for example, nowadays you have so many online series or even MOOCs available. If you decide to go for those, they would give you online certification also. So all these things will come under self-directed lifelong learning. Then next comes to professional lifelong learning. This is specifically for professional development, specifically with respect to your job training, with respect to the skills which are required on your job. And basically, this is also completed on the job. So it is called as learning on the job. Say, for example, you are doing optometry practice and you decided to do, say, 6 months of fellowship in contact lens. This would be termed as professional lifelong learning course. Then comes personal. It's basically for your passion or for your interest. Like, for example, some of you may decide to learn photography, and you may get enrolled into one of the online course on photography. So it is outside your workplace. It is outside your work skills. It is outside your professional scope, but it's only for your pleasure. It's for your passion and interest, and that will probably keep you alive. Then there is indirect lifelong learning. So indirect means you haven't planned for it really, but you still gain some knowledge or you still gain some attitude. So basically the person doesn't know that he is going or he is undertaking lifelong learning, but it's happening indirectly. Say through conversation with your seniors or peers or reputed speakers in your profession, or it can be just unexpected lessons learned during your practice, or maybe some customer comes in your clinic or your optical outlet, and it just teaches you a lesson that this problem can be solved by this method. Or it can also enhance by enhancing the relationship with your peers, or even when you travel, you can learn so many things. And then comes informal, which is exactly opposite of formal, I would say. And it's basically your own effort through reading, watching YouTube videos from peers, or from even by trial and error methods. When you try to do something new and you don't know the result, but you get amazing results and you learn some new skill. So there it comes, informal lifelong learning. So basically, if you would wonder that how do I become active lifelong learner, any one of us, to be very frank, is a lifelong learner. But if you have to be professional in that, or if you have to pursue that, then you need to do something. So what you can do is you can voluntarily enroll yourself into various courses, which can be offline, online. Nowadays, there are so many certificate courses which are available online, maybe on Coursera like platforms, or even on YouTube, something like OALS platform. So you can voluntarily enroll into those courses and complete those courses to acquire some certificate. You can attend various seminars, CEPs, continued education programs, workshops, conferences, which generally we all do. But I would now specifically talk about 3 different methods which you may or may not have learned about or heard about, and which you can implement in your daily routine life in order to become a lifelong learner. So first of that is, of course, reflective practice. That is viewing of your own experiences as opportunities for the learning. We'll talk that in detail in a minute. Second is evidence-based practice, which is referring to the scientific literature or the research which is published in various different scientific journals. And 360-degree feedback, also called as multi-source feedback. We will be talking about these 3 in a great detail. But always remember that being a student is really very easy, but learning requires actual work. So you need to put in active participation. You need to put in some efforts to learn something really new, to expand your knowledge, to expand your skills, and also to gain a very good professional attitude. Coming to reflective practices. Now, basically, what are reflective practices is nothing but you have some new action done, you record that action, maybe you do audio recording, video recording, or ask some colleague to observe and give you feedback about, and you record it. Once you record that, you reflect upon it. So you think about what you did, how you did. We will do that in a minute. And then you analyze the reflection and say, okay, what went wrong or what went right? And should I continue with that practice or should I discontinue? And again, that would lead to one more new action. So that is what is called as reflective practice, which cycle completes. You actually are at a different level of learning. So you can do this in your everyday practice when you are dealing with patients, when you are dealing with customers, and all these experiences in clinics or in your outlets will give you learning. So reflect on your performance. How you reflect? There can be various different methods by which you do, but most popular is quick reflection. What is that quick reflection? It's just a mental exercise. Say, for example, you attend a low vision patient, and after you finish up all the diagnostic test, and probably you have kept the patient for dilatation, or the patient is waiting for something, and in between you just quickly revise or quickly recap in your own mind that how you did, what you did, how the low vision test went about, if you would have done something extra or if you would have done something less. All these things will run into a plan, will give you some plan, action plan, which you can keep in mind for the next patient. So that is called as quick reflection. And the other end of the spectrum is detailed reflection, where you have deep expressions in the form of essay writing. So this is more like a formal reflective practice, wherein you start writing essay, not during your OPD hours or not during your practice hours, but maybe at the end of the day, you would just sit down for 15-20 minutes and you actually write down a paper or maybe a paragraph wherein you find out what actually you did and how you did. So I would give you some guidelines about how you can complete this reflective practice, but always remember that reflective practice can be individual, or most of the time, yes, it is an individual effort, but it can also be a shared activity. So you may reflect along with your team. You may reflect along with your peer. If more people are reflecting together, team reflection is happening. It is giving you a more wholesome scenario or more wholesome idea of exactly what went, how it went, how was the performance. So if I have to explain you this experiential learning cycle, then how do you reflect about it? First of all, you do it. So say clinical examination of a low vision patient, you did it. You did some 5 to 7 diagnostic tests in that, and then you start reflecting on it. So first question you ask is what exactly you did. So what happened? What was the result? Each and individual test you just mentally run through, and then you find out how you did it, what exactly you did, and what were the results of the test. Were they good? Were they not so good? Can they be improved? Can they be, were they optimum? All those things will come under what. So it's basically a description of your performance. Then the next question comes is so what? So if you get a result which is optimum, you say, okay, it was optimum. I need to continue with the same style. If they were not optimum, if they were under or over, that means your performance is under performance or over performance. For the same thing, you tried little less, or your efforts were little more. You could have reduced those efforts. So what will give you that how can I influence the outcome? Say, for example, instead of doing 7 tests on low vision patient, you could have managed the same diagnosis within 5 tests. So it implies that you did 2 extra. So that was like a over performance. Even for you, your team, that was more time consuming, more resource consuming. And that is where you say, okay, so what happened? I actually overshooted my performance and I could reduce it to find an optimum diagnostic. So what answers that whether it was good, bad, and if it needs to be improved, then in which direction it needs to be improved. And then the third question answers is now what? So this is more futuristic plan. So once you have understood what you did, once you have analyzed how you did, now you say, okay, what will I do next time? How will I do the things differently next time? So maybe, like I said, if you have overshooted your performance, you will try to cut down 2 tests from those diagnostic battery, and then you will fit everything into 5 tests, which will give you good diagnostics. So these things will basically optimize the performance. It will just be enough to give you a professional satisfaction. It will not be under, it will not be over. Again, we take example of pandemic here, and we say what happened. So pandemic came, so you have infections and spread of infection, which was really very fast. So many people were becoming sick, and so many even died in this pandemic. So what? So you modified your practices, you started using gloves, you started using so many other protective gears. Now what is next? So in future, would you continue with this practice? Would you still modify it further? Or would you say, okay, the old good practice was good enough and I need not modify anything? So all these things will complete a cycle, which is called as simple experiential learning cycle. And I believe that each one of us can do this reflection mentally, probably quick reflection at the end of our OPD session, or maybe at the end of the day. Let's say it just takes about 5 minutes to revisualize your day or revisualize your session, and then finding out whether your performance was optimum or not. So these things will give you a complete picture over the period of time. Let's say today you say, okay, I underperformed it. Tomorrow I was still under. Day after tomorrow I became slightly over. So all these things over a period of time, let's say over 1 month time, you will perfectly understand what is good performance, and you will start doing that, or you will keep on doing that good performance with you. If you are a student, same thing happens for your studies. So you say what you studied, how you studied, what were the results of that study, did you had anything to influence that particular result, and then would you continue the same style of study next time or not? So same thing happens everywhere. Let it be clinical practice, let it be optical outlet, let it be your study if you are a student, or let it be anything. This cycle applies to each and every situation. What are different methods to do it? I'll give you some quick list of methods which you can actually use every day and complete this cycle so that your learning continues every day. First is called as 1 minute paper. So just like I said, you just grab a paper, and in another 1 minute, you just write down a small paragraph answering these 3 questions. So you would find out what exactly happened, how it happened, and now would you like to continue with that or not. That is called as 1 minute paper. Second is called 1-2-3 method. Now 1-2-3 method is per se very simple method in that you just need to find out what were the good things you did, that are any three things that you did which you say, okay, these were the good points. So you are studying, for example, any three things that you remember from your studies that you need to write down sequentially as a list. Then 3, 2, 1. So 2 is nothing but any two things which actually you did, but you are not very satisfied with it. So learning was not very clear, or maybe with that patient you could have done little better. So any two things which you could say that, okay, these can be improved, and amongst that, any one thing which actually you would improve next time. So any one concept which you did not understand or which was not done very good in the earlier session, you would actually improve that in the next session. So 1-2-3 method, or sometimes called as 3-2-1 method. Then something is called as muddy point. So you think about what was the most confusing, most muddy picture in entire day. So maybe you had some patient and you were not so clear on diagnosis, or maybe you gave some spectacle to some person and that person did not like it, or you could not convince him for that particular spectacle, or anything which actually you say, no, not an optimum performance. I was not happy with that particular patient or a customer, or even when you are studying, I haven't actually understood the concept. So this remains to be your muddy point, and you write it down in a very short paragraph so that next time it comes, you remember that, okay, that time I had some difficulty. Now I must improve upon when I had decided this now what question. You can also write a very short note on it, maybe just 1 page on it, and there can be a formal long essay practice. Now, this is what I would really recommend you to do maybe once in a week. So you should actually write a long essay, maybe two full scale pages worth of essay, which would really dive you deep into the reflective practice, and this would really be a good learning experience for each one of you. So long essay is something which you should try, and not every day. I'm not saying that every day it is possible. Every day all these short methods are possible, but long essay maybe once in a week is actually good. Now coming to second method, that is called as evidence-based practice method. So basically what is evidence-based practice? If I have to sum it up, or if I have to just give you in a one single line, it is just your professional practice which is done with the help of a scientifically published evidence or a scientifically published literature. So what you need to do is you encounter with any concept in your studies, or you encounter with any clinical scenario, you have any patient in front of you, you just have list of diagnostic tests and results of those tests, and you simply don't know what is going to happen, and you are not able to decide the management plan on it. So what you do, you frame a PICO question. PICO will come to that in a minute, but you ask a clinical question which is answerable. You acquire relative scientific database or relative literature on that. You appraise that literature, saying that whether it is good to adapt or not good to adapt for your situation. You can apply that along with the experience, your own experience, and also the patient preferences. So you consider these three things together, and then you formulate a solution, and then you audit or you look back into the results again, reflect here, look back into the results and say whether this solution was really good or not, whether it worked or really it did not work. So all this composed is called as 5A of evidence-based practice. And why do you really want to go in such a difficult mode or such a difficult method? I would say, in one line, the more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. You read scientific literature when you are off your OPD or off your duty, while you are relaxing probably, or maybe you are studying, or maybe you are not attending any kind of patient, customer, or examination. At that time, you read through these kind of literatures to update your knowledge. The more you sweat in the peace, the less you will bleed in the war. So in front of patient, in front of customers, or during the examination for the students, you will bleed less. So I would refer you here, if any one of you have are not so familiar with this concept called evidence-based practice, you can go back to YouTube. The link will be provided in the description of this particular session. There is one evidence-based practice session done by OALS in the previous days, where the author has actually covered in a very detailed manner. He has covered evidence-based practice. It's how do you go about it, what are the steps, and how do you get benefit of it. So it's entire 1 hour lecture, and you can refer to that lecture. Please go through that lecture and then try to adapt this practice as a lifelong learner. So I'll just give you a very short brief summary about this. So you can go with ask, that is formulate and answerably clinical question. Now here the key is the clinical question, which is answerable. You should not ask something hypothetical, or you should not ask something which people might not have thought about and no research has been done on that particular scope. Then you acquire. Now before going here, I would like Fakhruddin to get second poll question here, asking how many of you know various different databases and various different literatures. It's just if you know it or if you don't know
it. So it's kind of a
half. Yeah.
50 kind of a thing. Yeah. Half of them know about it, half of them are not really aware about it.
Correct. So basically, again, that particular lecture will give you very much in detail about where to go and find databases. But here, if I tell you in short, you just go acquire the open the search engines. Like for example, you have PubMed, you have Google Scholar, you have Cochrane, you have CINAHL, you have so many other scientific databases. You formulate your search strategy using PICO in the ask questions, and you use and or not like Boolean operators in order to customize, in order to tailor-made your search, so that you can acquire the exact evidence, exact published paper that is required to answer that particular question. Now, coming to the evidence or coming to the scientific literature, here we have something called as hierarchy of evidence. And I would take a minute to explain this pyramid to you. What you get in those databases after you have searched is various numerous number of articles with various designs of the research. So basically, bottom of the pyramid, if you see, it's a background information that you have or an expert opinion that you have. It may be published, it may be unpublished, but later on you have what are called as case series or case control studies or cohort studies and randomized control trials, which are individual experiments done by the researcher to find the answer of the similar question which you have composed. So that is called as unfiltered information. And then if a researcher advances further and say, okay, I don't need a single individual study for this, but I need a group of studies which were addressing the similar question, so that I can have a better opinion of whether to adapt with that particular solution or not. So it will basically have critically appraised articles, something like a literature review, or it can have critically appraised topics, or it can be just systematic review. As you go higher on the pyramid, the quality of evidence would rise. So I would recommend that you go for systematic reviews if you have to answer any clinical question. I'll just take one example here, say for example, myopia control. Now you all know that in myopia control, there are various different strategies used. Say for example, some people use optical strategy, wherein you give bifocals or progressive lenses in order to reduce accommodative efforts and then thereby protecting or thereby controlling the growth of myopia. You can also have pharmacological interventions, or you can also have outdoor, indoor activity kind of interventions. You also have vision therapy like interventions. So you have multiple interventions. And if suppose some patient comes to you and you need to decide exactly what type of treatment will be best suitable to control his or her myopia at this stage. So you form a clinical question, you acquire a literature, I would say systematic review on this, because there are plenty of documents available which have done individually either the case control studies or the cohort studies or even RCTs, and then lot many people also have tried to combine all these results together to form a systematic review. So a systematic review would actually eventually give you an answer of how many published papers are for the result. That is, they say yes, myopia is controlled, or how many of them are against the result for any given strategy. Let's say, for example, you say optical strategy, wherein whether you give bifocal or progressives. So maybe there would be a 10, 15 papers published on this topic, and maybe 7 of them say yes, giving bifocals and progressives is actually good, and maybe 8 of them which are saying no, it doesn't actually help, it is just the same. So then systematic review would combine it and would give you unbiased and mathematically or statistically calculated result of whether you should apply this strategy or you should not apply this strategy. So it's that clear. And systematic reviews are very easy to read because they are written in a language where which can be understood even by a lay person. So any basic, even the first year student, for example, would understand that because it's not research language. It is just the language of your own textbook. So systematic reviews is something which will help you answer your evidence, answer your clinical question. But should you take any systematic review, or should you take any kind of research paper that is given by maybe Google Scholar, for example, or PubMed? The answer is no. What you should do after acquiring that particular published document is you should appraise it. You can use critical appraisal tools. There are numerous number of critical appraisal tools available on the internet. Even you have some Android and iPhone or Apple apps available for this. So you can use those apps and you can find out if the research paper that you have acquired is good enough for your clinical question to apply, or it's not so good, whether you should consider that as your top priority or not. Then once you decide that yes, once you appraise it as yes, it is good for my application, then you actually combine your clinical experience, your patient preferences, and then the evidence-based solution that you have got to formulate a complete management strategy. So this is what apply. So this is your answer to your clinical question. And then you audit, you recheck your results. Once you give the treatment or the management plan to the patient, and maybe next follow-up you actually find out if it has worked or not, if it has given you the result or not. Maybe for myopia control, after a year, the child comes back and then you say, okay, myopia has not progressed that much. The rate of progression is reduced. So which means it has worked. So this kind of evidence-based practice you should do. And this is a great deal of learning. I'll give you my own example, for example. Okay, so when I was doing graduation in optometry, we did not hear anything as silicon hydrogel lenses because at that time this kind of material did not exist. What we had is glass contact lenses, RGP, and soft contact lenses, which are just conventional. That is 1 year, maybe for 1 year wear. So not even disposable category. So all these things, when they came in market, we actually read through their papers. The company publishes its literature. They publish the white papers on it. They publish results of their clinical trials. And then as a practitioner, you should decide if you want to go ahead with that kind of contact lens or not, that kind of material or not. So this is really very good tool in order to upgrade your skill, upgrade your knowledge, and then acquire that confidence to practice in a latest mode. Okay, you should not practice something which is like 20-year-old gain knowledge. Nowadays, for example, I would highly recommend this to the students. I mean, among the participants, whoever is student, always remember that whatever you are learning right now, by the time you graduate, it's going to be outdated. So you should acquire this skill right now when you are a student, so that you start lifelong learning the moment you come out of your college, the moment you get graduated. This is a very important method for lifelong learning. And as I said, I have just covered that in a bit. You can actually go to that the earlier published lecture, I would say, on YouTube, and find out details on it. Then the third method of lifelong learning is called as multi-source feedback training, or also called as 360-degree feedback. Now, as the term is suggesting, 360 degree. So it is not just feedback by one person, not by your boss or your teacher, but it is actually a feedback by many in the organization. So it's receiving the feedback from multiple sources. What it does, it's basically it is giving you variety of perspectives from various different individuals. So majority of the times, what this gives you is your own perspective, your peer perspective, your mentor or supervisor perspective, and also your customer or patient perspective. These four are really very standard. And apart from this, if you have 5, 6, 7, 8 perspectives, that is actually helping you understand the real scenario, and it gives you a complete wholesome picture of your performance, and then you reflect upon it and then improvise it. So basically there is something called as 360-degree training system, wherein first step you do is you assess. Usually it is done by questionnaire survey tools, which are designed generally by HR people, or maybe you can design it for yourself. Say for example, you are a group of 5 students or 5 practitioners. You design one survey tool, one questionnaire, which is asking maybe how did you record visual acuity, were you accurate in doing refraction, were you good in doing, or were you fast in doing subjective refraction, something like that. You just generate a questionnaire and you try to run through all 5 of you. So each one is answering the questionnaire first for oneself, and then secondly for your peers, and then whatever the result comes in, you analyze it, and that will probably give you a feedback which will generate a direct report from the mentor, supervisor, peer, and self. So these 4 are like mandatory. There can be involvement of a patient, patient's relative, customer, anybody who is observing you during your performance. If you are in a hospital, it can be admin staff, nurse, or paramedical, other paramedical or medical staff. N number of people can get involved in, but the must criteria is here is self-evaluation. You must have your own feedback for you, and then you must have your feedback for you. These 2 are like must, and remaining are as per their availability. Then you compose a training program to develop the strength and the weaknesses that you have revealed during the assessment. So what are the benefits of 360-degree feedback? I'm actually showing you a chart here or a graph here, which I had plotted for 70 students, 71 students for their skills. So one of the skill, for example, was communication skill. The other skill was evidence-based practice. Some other skills were like professional attitude. So all these things were rated on the scale of 5, and each individual got his graph. Okay, so 4 people evaluated. I mean, each point on the graph is representing 4 people response, and you can actually see that some of the scores are inside the red zone, which is like you disqualify. If it is between red and green zone, you are like just about passing, and if it is beyond green zone, then you are good to go. You are actually good or proficient in that particular skill. So this this is the kind of analysis, or this is the pictorial representation of this 360-degree feedback. And then what are the benefits of it? So first is increased awareness, self-awareness. You will know what you did right, what you did wrong, not only from your perspective, but also from the peer perspective, what others are thinking, whether you did something good or bad. Sometimes it happens, like we say, yeah, I was the great person and I actually performed really very fast, while some other person watching you might say that, oh, he was so slow, and then he did not even recognize that how much time he grabbed for that particular test, and it was really pathetic. So this gives you a good self-awareness from entire 360-degree perspective. You get full perspective of your strengths and weaknesses. All these things, when you get a real picture, it actually builds your confidence and also boosts your morale. So something which you are doing right, you become confident about it. And something which is like your underperformance, you would actually get motivated, that you would decide that, okay, I need to improvise on this particular point because the feedback on this point says that I'm really weak. So it builds confidence and boosts morale. It creates a culture of openness in the team because you are not only evaluating yourself, you are also evaluating your peer, and the peer is also evaluating you. So it becomes a transparent deal, and that is where the culture of openness is created. It creates accountability as well towards the profession, towards your duties, towards your organization. It also clarifies behavior. It fosters continuous improvement, and it's the launching point of effective professional development. So I would say that if you are good in, or if you can develop a workable questionnaire, I would say it may not be validated questionnaire because you're not doing any research here. It's just that you're applying the results for yourself or your team. Formulate a good questionnaire and then try to get 360-degree feedback from various different people in your team and start your professional development as a team immediately. Reflect upon those performances more formally, count upon those performances, and then see if you are improving it or not in, let's say, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, whatever target that you decide upon. So these are the 3 methods which you can actually use in your practice. And if you are now enough motivated to say, okay, I want to become a lifelong learner, I would just give you some tips to get started. What you need? All you need is open mind, nothing else. If you are open-minded person, if you are ready to accept criticism, good, bad points about you, you can be a lifelong learner. What you should do? You should ask more and speak less, so that you can gain more knowledge from outside and you can actually gain the better attitude towards professional practice. You should have increased awareness about what are your interests, what are your needs, that is professional needs, and what is the situation around. If you have increased awareness about these 3 things minimum, then you're good to go as a lifelong learner. You should always start small. I'm not saying that, okay, tomorrow you go in some college and enroll yourself for at least a diploma or at least a certificate course. No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is maybe just 2 minutes of reflection and then just improve upon one single point every day. And that would really, really benefit you in your professional development. So start small and gradually increase. Again, you would get failures, and not every day is yours. You decided to improve upon some point and it just did not happen. So there are going to be failures, but always remember, failure is the first step of learning. So become a lifelong learner by, I would say, acquiring more failures, because they would really teach you what is good and what is not so good. Take the learning ownership. So understand that whatever is professional development due, you are the owner of it. You are responsible for it. Nobody else is going to drive you to this learning. What people will expect is your performance should be optimum, but they will never tell you the journey. They will never tell you, okay, you need to learn 1, 2, 3 extra so that your performance becomes optimum. Your HR or your senior would never say that you learn 1, 2, 3 skills and that is where you would be optimum in your performance. They would just come, appraise your, you have your yearly or semester-wise appraisals, or for students it's semester-wise examination. They would just ask you some random questions and they would just say, okay, you have either failed or you have just managed to pass, but your performance was not optimal. And then you will continue to wonder, like, what happened, what went wrong. Only thing went wrong was you did not take ownership of your learning. If you manage that point, you are good. Your appraisals will go really very smooth. And last is turn your mistakes into opportunities. Just like, for example, we saw during pandemic, so many people prosper. So many people actually took leadership in management of certain conditions. Why? Because whatever challenges they encountered, they use that as an opportunity to prosper. So here, your mistakes as a learner, your mistakes will become opportunities for you to become better learner. So turn your mistakes into opportunities. So in simple words, if I say, the take-home message is that we are now living in a very new age here after the or during and after the pandemic. This pandemic has imposed very complex demands on us, and the environment around us is really very rapidly changing. And then I would really urge graduate students not to wait for graduation, because the day you are graduating, all your knowledge gained during graduation is going to become old, and you need to update that. I'm not saying it, you need to condemn that. That knowledge is important, but updates on those knowledge, on those concepts is actually important. So the only way to survive here is committing to a process of lifelong learning, and commit yourself to be a lifelong learner. Commit yourself to be a team of good members. Thank you. And I'm open here for all the questions.
All right. So thank you very much, Dr. Ajans, for that very informative talk. I think, as you stated, all of us are learners, and these are the steps which we could incorporate slowly and steadily. And I think all the three methods what you described to us, they are quite doable actually, and I think probably indirectly we are doing that, not as a planned rule, but I think sometimes we indirectly do all of those things. But it's good to appraise, and it's good to come back to it and see whether we have made changes and did that change.
I would say here that yes, we do it, but we don't do it in a planned way. We do it in a random way. So these things will really work better if we are really planning it and we are doing it in a very formal sense, so that we can get maximum benefit out of it.
That's true. Yeah. And just the quick question. This is just again which I was thinking about. When it comes to the evidence-based practice and incorporating evidence-based practice into lifelong learning, what do you think are possible obstacles or challenges which we might face in the earlier steps? If you want to say something about that.
So, this is actually a very good question in order to get into the practice of evidence-based practice, because so many times we hear about it and we don't practice it because we encounter so many small challenges. Now, first challenge is motivation. If you are motivated that, okay, you should go and find out literature or find out a scientific paper on it, and if you are motivated to read it through, then only evidence-based practice can start. If you are not motivated, if you just say casually, okay, someday I will find out, it's not going to happen someday. So you should actually be serious about it. You should actually decide, okay, today at least one patient I would do EBP, and then that would be really a start point of your EBP. Second major challenge is, if you are acquiring, let's say, RCT or any scientific paper which was done, which is written on one single experiment, one single study design, it is really difficult to comprehend for maybe a graduate student or somebody who has never read scientific literature, because the language of that particular paper is entirely scientific. So, you would really feel like you are reading something written in Latin and you're not understanding what is happening around that. So that is where I recommend that you should go through systematic reviews in order to get answers to your clinical questions, because they are really very easy in terms of language, and you can have ready-made solution, because so many researchers have put in efforts to combine all the literature which is available on the earth for that particular question, and then give you a ready-made solution, give you a ready-made answer of what is applicable, what is not applicable. And that is where you can trust it better. And third challenge I would expect is you are doubting capacity to apply it. So maybe the research has given you answer, but you are still not comfortable with it, or you say, okay, that's really a new way of treatment and I don't know whether I'll be able to do it or not. So there, I think you need to acquire some courage in order to get some good results with a new treatment possibilities. So I would just say these three challenges, and they are actually very easy to overcome. It's just that your decision power that would overcome it.
Yeah, that's right. So I totally understand and agree to what you said. We learn about EVP and we say, okay, we'll start, but then that kickstart must come from yourself. It never happens. That's right. But to be very honest, I think I do echo your point where you said that, when you are a student, whatever you learn when you are into your graduating years is probably outdated when you graduate. Like when you were
Yeah,
saying about contact lenses, silicon hydrogels were not even, disposables were not even there when you were
exactly.
studying. Yeah, same thing happens to, I mean, if I talk about myself, myopia control was nowhere to be, we
True,
didn't know about myopia control.
true,
There
true.
was nothing like myopia management 5, 10 years back.
Yeah,
And now myopia management is like
keyword.
everybody has to do it.
Yes.
So that's really important for us to keep ourselves updated and evolve as we go. And all of
Yeah.
these methods what we are.
And I would here say that update yourself not by marketing material, because so many companies will give you say myopia control optical treatment. So many companies will tell you that our lenses are good for myopia control. Maybe yes, they are good, but you should not depend only on the information which is provided by these marketing guys. That's why I recommend EBP there, wherein you acquire some scientific evidence, and then based on that you decide, or you take your call on which treatment you want to really go about.
That's right. Yeah. So I think, would you recommend all practitioners, everyone, to at least read a paper or a scientific
Yes,
journal publication at least once a week, if not once a
that's
day,
what I
to
said.
be updated,
That's what
right?
I said. That uh, quick reflections every day, maybe long reflection once in a week, evidence-based practice to begin with, because everyone is not habitual to. So to begin with, I would say you just decide that okay, one patient I would just start tomorrow, and maybe once in 3 days I would just have any one patient which is done with EVP.
Mm.
So that counts to around say 2 papers per week. And I would really recommend systematic reviews here because they are very easy to read. And I'm time and again I'm pressing this point because they really give you a good opinion. See, body of researchers, body of intellectual minds across world have put in their efforts to give you the total, I would say, result of what all literature is available. So instead of keeping on reading one single experiment and then getting confused about okay, XYZ said yes it works, ABC said no it doesn't work, MNP said okay it's neutral, sometimes it may work, sometimes it doesn't work. Getting into all those hassles, it's really tough. I mean, going with systematic reviews, you have that advantage that topmost brains of your field have worked upon that same question, and you have the ready-made answer which is given to you in really layperson's language. I mean, if you go on to, let's say, Cochrane systematic reviews, they even have one-page summary which is actually understood even by your patients. So
Yeah.
even though you do not have any scientific knowledge, you still understand what is written in that systematic review.
Mhm.
And maybe once or twice or maybe 3 times you have read a systematic review, then that language will fit in your brain. And then it will be just a matter of, say, 5 minutes to go through that paper entirely and start the critical appraisal. It won't
Yeah.
take more than that time after you have got that idea of how the
Hands-on.
systematic review looks like.
That's right. Yeah, I think I was just about to ask that, the Cochrane review abstract. I don't think they call it an abstract, but I think they call it as a summary
Layperson summary,
paper.
layperson language
Yeah.
summary.
That can be an evidence which you can provide to your patients as well, right? As a leaflet over, and it's
Yes,
all
yes,
updated, and that
yes,
would be very useful in clinical practice as well, right?
yes.
Yeah. All right. So I think with that we have discussed a lot, I guess, and I think the most important thing now is applying it, right? So I hope everyone can start applying slowly and steadily, and appraise it. As you mentioned, look back after 3 months, 2 months, see whether
Correct.
you have improved or where you can make
Correct.
more changes and all
So,
of this.
it remains to be like a loop. So, you continue to be in the loop and then you continue to be a lifelong learner.
That's right. Yeah, great. So thank you so much, Dr. Rajans, for that wonderful talk,
My
and it's
pleasure.
really appreciated from everyone. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Before you close, I just want to thank each and everyone who is attending this session because it truly proves that you are a lifelong learner I would really urge and request all of you to really be very serious about your learning and take at least one of these methods as your regular practice, then I would consider this session as a success. Thank you so much.
Most welcome. It is indeed a success. Thank you so much for that kind words. So, to the attendees, just to have some quick announcements before we close for today. We do have a session planned next weekend. We are doing it at the same time as of today, and this will be done by an ophthalmologist. Dr. Urmi is going to talk to us about what could be the possible causes of reduced vision post-cataract surgery. And I think an optometrist's role in cataract surgery post and pre-evaluation is a very important part. So I think it will be very useful for us to hear from an ophthalmologist perspective. So please do join us, and please do save this date onto your calendars, because we are planning to celebrate World Sight Day with all of you on 14th October. We have planned 4 hours of e-symposium based on primary eye care, and we wish to have you joining us on that day as well. Again, until then, see you next week. Take care, be safe, and bye-bye.